Good evening and welcome on behalf of Oxford Civic Society to what I hope is going to be a really quite exciting evening. For those of you who are new to the Civic Society, we are a voluntary group dedicated to the continuous improvement of Oxford as a city where people live, work, study and relax. We run a lot of talks like this. We normally run walks and other activities, but we also do have active working groups on issues such as planning and transport. And we always welcome new members. And so if you haven't had a check, please do look at our website. You'll find Oxford Civic Society very easily. And I hope you'll stay with us, and I hope you'll find tonight interesting. I strongly suspect it's going to be very interesting because tonight's speaker is Dr. Barbara Hammond, who I'm sure some of you will know. It's an interesting time. The last couple of years has seen a huge focus on climate change and matters green, but it's worth remembering that some people have been working on those issues for a very long time. And Barbara is one of them. From 2000 until about 2010, Barbara was working in government on the UK government's early work on renewable energy. But she's become better known to us in Oxford because around about 2008, she started to set up what has become the Low Carbon Hub with the support from the City Council. Some of you may have invested in it. The Low Carbon Hub has done a great deal to raise money for renewable energy. And I'm sure Barbara will tell you more about that because I believe the current fund is open for investment. So, yeah, it started out small with solar panels on Matthew Arnold School and one or two other things like that. We've been through a whole range of other projects. I can remember being very excited to see the bus garage up at Cowley being one of the first large roofs in Oxford to be covered in solar. And other projects such as the major Sanford Hydro scheme on the River Thames have also been completely innovative. And of course, the Low Carbon Hub is important for all of us because it's not just about generating renewable energy. It's about who owns that facility. It's one of the most successful community energy projects, and all those of us who invested in it have got a stake in it. So I'm wishing it all the very best for the future, and I hope you all are too. So I'm very happy that we've got Barbara with us tonight to talk not just about how we save energy or power down, but also about how we generate a lot more power, and I strongly suspect how we supply that through new approaches to the grid. I think it's going to be a really fascinating evening. Barbara, many thanks for taking part. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Chris. I'm not sure that I can really live up to that introduction, but I'll give it my best shot. So I'm going to talk about powering a greener future. And one of the first things to say is that powering a greener future is going to be mainly about electricity. And that means that we're going to be not just powering our homes, our laptops, our iPads, our mobile phones, our lights, but we're also going to be heating our homes and powering our transport with electricity. And that just means that the whole system is going to have to change quite radically in order for that to happen. So we're starting to put powering down and powering up in the hub into, we're starting to work out how to make a single concept out of that. So to help people really change their whole energy metabolism as households, businesses, institutions. So that's what I'm hoping to give, to shine a light on this evening. So it is, if you've seen me talk before, you will have seen this image before. It's all about, the future is all about how we go from this sort of very centralized, very large fossil fuel power station, such as we used to have at Didcot, We still have a bit of it left, but it's going to this sort of future, which is about very decentralized renewable energy, millions of electric vehicles coming into our national fleet and needing to have power right at the most local areas, right at our own front doors, right at the front doors of our businesses, and how we deal with a system that is fueled mainly by very local, decentralized energy resources. How do we fit all of that together into a workable system, given that electricity generation and use has to be balanced at all times? And it has been, until very recently, very difficult and expensive to store electricity. And in making that change, how can we all help? And that's the question that we're asked so many times. People are really waking up to the idea that we have to change how we do things, and they really want to take part, they really want to help. And it's not just about investing to make more of this stuff happen, as Chris was talking about before. It is how all of us can help. And I just really love the way people say that. They say, don't blind me with science about how the system works, just tell me what I can do. And so right at our own sockets and inside our own houses, what can we all do to help? I hope to give you a flavour of that tonight, but it certainly won't be fully fledged solutions. At the moment, I'm not sure how much all of you will know about how the electricity system works in the UK and indeed anywhere, but it is all top down. We have this enormous thing called the transmission network in the UK, which is all of those pylons that you see marching across the landscape that take the electricity from those big fossil fuel power stations or the nuclear power stations and bring it to our houses where we plug in our toasters and use our kettles. And it's quite a thing. I mean, it's an enormous achievement in the UK in particular. I think it's been a really well developed, a really well built, well thought out, robust system that has supplied us all with our power for a long time. I mean, some of us are old enough to remember the disruptions of the 1970s and power cuts and 3-day weeks and all of that sort of stuff. But generally speaking, it's a very robust system. We don't have happening in the UK what happened in Texas just in the last week. Increasingly onto that very large scale energy generation, electricity generation system are coming onshore and increasingly offshore wind farms at really quite enormous scale. And when I was in government, I'm very proud to have on my record putting in place the first offshore wind capital grants programme and keeping that programme going through the 2003 Energy White Paper when there was very little money about, and I got the only money that was awarded through that Energy White Paper to keep the offshore wind programme going. We're now seeing the fruits of that. But our system is not going to be solved just by lots and lots of offshore wind farms all around the coast of the UK, although it is an enormous advantage to us that we've got that. Just amazing that we've had oil and gas to the extent that we have, and now we can exploit our amazing wind potential. So that's how it works at the moment. You have these enormous generating stations. The power goes from them right through this system to our homes. And it's a very top-down, the energy is pushed out to all of us from the centre, from a few big power stations. But it needs to turn around and become much more driven from the bottom up. So all of us are starting to think about how our households can produce energy as well as use energy. You may have solar panels on your roof, you may have solar thermal, you may have a heat pump, you may have an EV car, you may have invested in things like Sanford Hydro, which is the little hydro icons at the bottom there. And all of that, those things are connected to the energy system at the most local level. And you may or may not know, but the coming in from with the red there from the transition system, the voltage level is at 132 kilovolts and then gets stepped down to 33 kilovolts at the bulk supply point, and then down again at the primary substation to 11 kilovolts, and then down again to 440 volts, and then it comes into your house at 240 volts. And the system is designed for that stepping to happen in a sort of cascade way from those big generators at the top. We're now getting a world where all of that is turned upside down with lots and lots of quite small renewable energy generators from solar ground mount, onshore wind farms. They might look big, but they're still small in comparison to what those fossil fuel power plants are like. And they quite often need to push power into the system, and we need to have energy flowing both ways, electricity flowing both ways, down as well as up. The system is not designed for that. How do we make that change in the amount of time that we have to get to zero carbon energy system? We have to have gone quite a long way there by 2030. We definitely need to have cracked it, and everything to be operating in that way by 2050. So if you think about it, you know, you've got to go from that to that. And, oh, I can't do it. It's like, yeah, that. It's been described to me as like, if you think of a motorway with the 3 lanes going in one direction and the cars are all going in one direction at night time with their headlights off, suddenly all the lights go out and you've got to swap one of those lanes around so that the cars are going in the other direction without anybody crashing into themselves and causing a lot of damage. That's what we've got to do to the electricity system. It's not trivial, but we do know how to do it. And one of the main reasons why we're going to be able to do it is that we've got smart technologies. So quite often people concentrate on the energy technologies, the solar, the wind, the hydro, the whatever. We really know how to do that now. We've demonstrated it. We know that they work. We know how to handle intermittency with storage or balancing. It really is about the smart data management and the smart communications technologies we now have that will allow us to run the energy system like this. And so in saying that the system needs to now work bottom up, that means that all of us need to be involved in making that change. It's all about what's called the grid edge. So if you look at Oxfordshire, it's the red cross is there where the transmission networks hits the county. We've got 4 bulk supply points coming into the county. And then the rest of it is the distribution network, which is the grid edge. And so what we are looking at in the hub increasingly is how a region like Oxfordshire can really take the bull by the horns and work out how to get as much generation, as much EV, as much electric heat onto the system as possible in a way that doesn't put strain on the system and doesn't require huge amounts more investment to go into the infrastructure. We want the investment to go into the generation and the demand reduction assets. So the question is, how can we fit thousands and thousands and thousands of electric vehicles onto that distribution network in Oxfordshire at the same time as we're making space for all electric heating, space and water heating too? Obviously, there's a lot that we can do in our own homes. You may or may not have heard of the new service that we've been setting up over the last couple of years called Cosy Homes Oxfordshire. This is an example of a terraced house in East Oxford that has gone through the whole programme, from the whole house assessment to fitting all of the technologies and holding the hand of the householder throughout so that they're kept safe through the process. They have high quality tradesmen to do the work for them. And as you can see here, it's a combination of very basic sorting out the fabric of the house at the same time as you're thinking of new technologies like a heat pump and a really well insulated, a really good thick front door. We can all think about how we do that, and there's Cosy Homes there that will help you do it. We can all think in our businesses about how we can reduce our demand, as well as putting generation technologies in. There's just some examples that we've done through our European Regional Development Fund programme, Ox Futures, and which we can now offer through another new service which is aimed at SMEs this time, called Energy Solutions Oxfordshire. And a couple of the examples that I really love are the ones that are on the right hand side, where, if anybody knows the Folly restaurant, they replaced their massive gas burners with induction hobs as part of the programme, which saves energy and also has the advantage that their chefs don't melt with the heat as they're cooking your supper in the way that they used to. So it's much healthier. And then the bottom one shows one of the electric boats that runs from the Folly restaurant. So their whole fleet is now electrically driven, and the next step is going to be working with them to get renewables into those boats. So what we want to be able to do in our own homes, in our own businesses, is to make and use our own energy. This is not about self-sufficiency. Absolutely not. That's a very unsafe way of trying to go. It might be okay if you're in the remote highlands, but it's not okay when you're living cheek by jowl with other people. It's just not resilient. But what we want to do is to optimize self-consumption. So as much as possible of your own energy use you make or you reduce is the idea. But then we want to work out how we work as energy communities, how we can put all of those efforts together and work out how that residual requirement that we're all going to need from the grid to make up the difference between our self-consumption and our actual consumption. How can we work as communities, as energy communities, to make that grid edge, to make Oxfordshire's local grid flexible? And this is what we're doing with Project Leo, Local Energy Oxfordshire, which is funded by the government through Innovate UK, as one of the 4 smart energy demonstrators that are happening in the whole country. And the thing that's different about Project Leo is that it's not about putting in a massive bit of kit like the big battery at the Energy Super Hub in Oxford. It's about how you link together all the little bits of kit that I've been talking about, and how you put together a market that allows people to trade energy, but also flexibility services. Services that make the grid able to take more capacity and to balance peaks and troughs in demand without putting in huge amounts more wires and switches. And the low carbon hub job in Project Leo is to be operating at that bit at the top of the diagram where it says local community, and work out what it means to be a local energy community, how we can all work together to help make this transition happen and benefit ourselves and our local communities at the same time. What does that actually mean? We're working in a number of exemplar places to work out what it means, because it is quite complicated. And what we're doing is we've got 9 places that we're working in Oxfordshire, across Oxfordshire, which on a basic sort of Boston box of more or less urban, more rural up the side, and more or less affluent across the bottom, so that we're getting a really good range of socioeconomic and geographic conditions. And so this slide doesn't cover all of them, but for example, we're working out on Osney Island how to integrate lots of electric vehicle infrastructure and help that community make the transition to EVs when it's a very dense urban environment. People don't have their own front gardens, nobody has a drive, very few people have a garage. So how do you get that transition to EVs in a relatively affluent community that doesn't have a lot of space, and where people can actually come almost to blows over who has which parking space? More rural, going down to the bottom left-hand corner, we're working in Deddington and Dunstew off the gas grid to work out how to get a mass change from oil heating to electric heating. On the right-hand side of the slide, we're working in Rose Hill to see how you can link together lots of little bits of flexibility that relatively less affluent households will have with community-owned or local authority-owned PVs and battery storage. How do you make that into a working energy community at the grid edge? And what are the co-benefits? How can you benefit that community of less affluent people in doing that, not just financially, but in other ways as well? And then in the bottom right-hand corner, in Hook Norton, we're working with the community there to build new community-owned housing that is behind just 1 meter. So it's what's called a microgrid. You just have 1 meter between it and the grid, and most of those needs are met from energy generation and storage on site, and the houses are built to Passive House standard. And then in the middle, at the top, we're working at Sandford Hydro to work out behind the secondary substation how a big generation asset like Sandford Hydro can fit into a community of businesses at the industrial estate on Sandford Lane to balance generation and use across the year and between the hydro and the businesses. And then in Ensham, we're working out how to plan long-term for energy within the primary substation area in a bit of Oxfordshire, where I'm sure many of you will know there's just tons of new housing coming at those communities like the proverbial train. And quite apart from any worries that the local community might have about that in terms of, you know, 2,500 getting on for new houses coming into their settlements, what that means for the electricity grid, how you can accommodate that to the best advantage of everybody living within the primary substation area, and certainly how you can put that new development in without needing gas, without needing fossil fuels, and maximising the amount of renewable energy on site, maximising the amount of EV transport beyond walking and cycling that you might need in those communities, and seeing if we can devise a way of producing and stewarding over the long term a local area energy plan that is intended to govern that and hold developers and politicians to account for actually delivering it as devised by the community. So those are some examples of how we're trying to demonstrate this new energy system in exemplar places. And I mean, when I say exemplar, I really mean exemplar. We're trying things out here. It's new. It might not succeed. It's not going to be everywhere. And the communities and the people in the communities working with us, we have to be very clear with them that we are trying things out. And therefore, we can't guarantee anything about the future of what we're trying there. And then we're also working on the range of assets to work out how they can become flex ready, able to help the grid be more flexible and to grow its capacity without growing its physical infrastructure. At the top left there is the installation that we're currently raising for, Ray Valley Solar in Arncott, just south of Bicester. What we're doing there is adding to the investment so that we're increasing the amount of generation that we can put through, that we can export from there beyond the grid connection that we have. And then we're going to be working out how to share grid capacity with people in businesses, other solar farms in the area, so that we can maximize that output from Ray Valley Solar and do that remotely when the grid needs us to. We put in a battery at Rosehill School to go with the PVs there. And this is it just being installed. So it's a boring box, but it's quite fun watching it speeded up going into place. And that one, there isn't a proven investment case for that sort of installation yet. So that one is being wholly funded with community benefit and grant. And we've already got it scheduling remotely, delivering flexibility services to the grid in simulated conditions. We haven't yet done it in reality, but we will do as part of Project Leo. The City Council's putting in lots of fabulous heat pumps and solar thermal and solar PV at Hinksey Lido, hopefully this summer. And then along the bottom, you'll see West Mill Wind. You'll be very familiar with that, I'm sure, Sanford Hydro and rooftop solar. Working out how to make these things flexible turns out to be not always very easy, and certainly not standard. So one of the things that we're doing with Leo is precisely to see what we can learn about how to get things flex ready in a standard way, in a known way that can be verified before you offer the service and get connected to the grid to do that. We don't want to have substations blowing up because we've got this stuff wrong. And with Sanford Hydro, excitingly, we're starting to use the river itself as a battery. So how can we hold back just small levels of water, but up a couple of miles of reach? That's quite a lot of water, and then run it through a peak period so that we can really help to bring that peak demand down, or to cope with it by making more energy. And I just love that. That is just so exciting. And we've actually run a couple of those trials already. And the Environment Agency are being very good and working with us so that they're being assured that we're not going to be flooding anything. And as part of the whole project, we're automating 2 of the gates on the Environment Agency weir, so that we've got really fine control over the levels, which is very exciting. Oh, sorry. Oh, I didn't want that to happen again. On we go. So what are actually the things, what are the services that I keep talking about when I say flexibility services? There are things that we can switch. So when the supply on the grid gets tight because we've got a very peaky peak, like it's the FA Cup final or the World Cup cricket final or the finals of Wimbledon or whatever it might be, we can remotely switch things off so that we reduce demand. So just taking a fridge down by a degree, or taking a heat pump down by a degree, or not doing the washing machine, telling the washing machine it can't go on until whatever time, programming EV charging, all of that sort of stuff. We can reduce the demand or we can shift it in time. Smart demand, demand response. We can increase local generation by what's called dispatchable power, which means that generally speaking, it's power that can be switched up, or it's got storage associated with it, and you can discharge the battery that you've stocked up earlier in the day when it's been sunny. So we can deal with peak demands when capacity gets tight. What do we do when there's too much generation? We're very used to thinking about peaks of demand when we all put the kettle on after Coronation Street's finished in the evening. We're not used yet to thinking about peaks of generation and how we deal with those. Last summer, with COVID, we had quite a problem in the UK with having too much solar. And the National Grid actually brought in a flexibility service, which was about people switching down. And I think if you were if you had Octopus or Bulb time of use tariffs, you might have experienced that last summer when you were paid to turn your demand down for a certain period of time. I think somebody I know actually made 14p doing that. So we can turn generation down. We can charge batteries. We could charge EV batteries if the connections between the EVs and the grid went both ways, not just charging them up to drive them, but also discharging them to help the grid. Holding the water back, as I was talking about, increasing demand by preheating water, by pre-cooling buildings, by scheduling particular tasks at particular times, being really smart about what energy we use when, which isn't us having to make the decision and switch it every time, but we program what we're prepared to do, what our boundaries are, and the system sorts it out for us, the smart system sorts it out for us. We can make room for new demand with those wires and switches in the electricity grid that we've already got. So if we coordinate our generation and demand really smartly, we can make room for lots more EV charging, for lots more heat pumps, whilst not having to have 3 times more grid, for example, without having to have a whole new power station, for example. This is all possible. It's been modelled. We know it's possible and we know we can do it. We have to demonstrate it, which is what Project Leo is all about. Then, very excitingly, there are things that we can share, and this is why energy communities are going to be so important. So we can share supply capacity. If I'm using less than my connection grid to the grid allows at the moment, and you, my neighbour or neighbouring business need more, I can lend you some, or I can sell you some that I've got spare. We can partner together to optimise use of that grid connection. We can share generation capacity. So at the moment, I could be generating more than my connection to the grid allows. At Ray Valley Solar, we've designed the system so that we've got over 1 megawatt of extra capacity, extra generation that we could put out to the grid if we can find somebody to share the capacity of the connection with us. Or and somebody else is generating less than the connection allows. You partner together and you trade between you that capacity. And then real-time matching of demand and generation. So you're not actually selling electrons from one person to another. You are just enabling demand and generation to balance between partners. So you agree that I'm going to increase my demand beyond my connection maximum, whilst you increase your generation so that my extra demand is balanced by your extra generation. that's netted off, and the grid doesn't need to know about it. Well, it does need to know about it because it needs to agree that it's safe, but it doesn't actually need anything else to happen apart from that. That is really exciting. The switching things I was talking about before are generally going to be procured by the distribution network. These are going to be our decisions in our communities about what we want to how we can share things. We will be paying for that probably, but there might be communities where we're actually sharing that to the benefit of everybody in the community, for community benefit. And that's really exciting. This is the fancy names of all of those services. On the left, it's the distribution network procured services, and on the right, it's those peer-to-peer services. So those are the fancy names for what I've just been talking about. And if all of that works, if the exemplar places, exemplar projects can all demonstrate that those services are possible, we will let you know about it, because we'll be starting to recruit you in your communities to do more of this and get the local grid in Oxfordshire balanced as far as we can to achieve zero carbon energy. Thank you. That's me. If there are any questions, I would be very happy to try and answer them.
Thank you very much, Barbara. That's fascinating, and I'm still struggling with your idea of the motorway changing lanes, and that sounds frightening.
Well, it is scary. I mean, for the distribution network and the engineers who have staked their whole careers on never letting the lights go out, this is scary stuff for them.
I just used my privilege to ask a question before we have any other questions. So how does this fit in with what other local projects are there taking place in a national sense? I mean, are we unusual in this setup here? We're
unique, Ian.
Okay, amazing.
This is by far the largest and most wide-ranging demonstration project of this way of running the grid that we've got. This is why we're one of the 4 smart energy demonstrators, and we're the only one that's really working on this flexibility service market in this way. And it's a consortium of 10 partners led by Scottish and Southern Electricity Network, who is our distribution network operator mainly in Oxfordshire. There's one little bit that's a different one. Both universities, city council, county council, some smart startup businesses and us, and everybody's learning from everybody else all the time. It's quite astonishing. Sometimes it's a bit overwhelming, to be honest.
Well, yeah, I mean, pushing the envelope on this, I've just had a question come in saying, do you think small nuclear generators are possible?
Yeah, well, they're possible. I think they've been demonstrated. Do we need them? Nah. Sorry, that's just my view. I know that nuclear is very steady, predictable baseload. I really get that, but there's all sorts of problems with nuclear that I don't think we need to rehearse. But you know, it's the resources as well as what you do with the waste, and we don't actually need it, and it's very much more expensive than all of these renewable technologies now that I've been talking about, which is a really exciting position to be in.
Okay. Just to say to everyone, if you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you so you can ask your own question, or I can read out your question if you've typed into the chat. There's a question here from Catherine Schock. I don't know if, Catherine, if you'd like to ask that yourself. Would you like me to unmute you? I'll do that now.
Thank you. Yes, it seems such a wonderful plan that you're thinking about, and it's terrific that Oxford has you here. But I just wondered if the Church of England, who've come up with this idea of using a lot more of their land for building, has got a similar sort of setup or ability to get somebody who can advise them in a similar way, so that it can go countrywide.
Yeah, that would be great. Shall I stop sharing my screen, or do people want the screen on? Because I can see more people if I stop sharing, I think.
Yeah, do stop with this.
The Church of England is an interesting case. I don't know whether you heard the Today programme interview about it a couple of days ago, I think it was. They were asking about how the plan was actually going to come into reality, given that quite often church estate projects have not delivered the social benefits that they were originally intended to, mainly because the Charities Act 2011 makes it quite hard for trustees to agree to any sort of land or property deal which is not best possible value, I think is the term. And we found a real problem with that, working with the Church of England and with other charitable trusts. And I really would like, it'd be great actually if we could get a campaign going. Chris, I'm looking at you at this point because you're Mr. Campaigns, you're brilliant at it, to get that provision of the Charities Act widened to include best financial, environmental, social governance practice, and really get those ESG outcomes into that clause. Because, you know, frankly, we have never managed to put PV on a Church of England school as the low carbon hub. Oxford North Community Renewables managed it once because of that clause, because you cannot find a surveyor who can sign off that it's best value.
Oh, that's crazy. And is there any government provision? There used to be a low carbon hub or low carbon trust, and I know that shut down. Is there anything like that now?
The Carbon Trust, you mean, is still going.
Oh, right.
I think that the social enterprise models that we have, particularly the Community Benefit Society, is a really fabulous way of getting this stuff done, because all of the profits legally have to go into community benefit, which in our case means helping local community groups to do things in their own communities, but also means that we can use it to match fund for projects like innovation projects like Project Leo, where we get 45% of the money as grant from government. We can use our community benefit to provide that 55%. And it just means that community energy can be at the forefront of innovation, because we're motivated to, and because we're structured to make resources available that are quite hard to come by otherwise. And I really hope that one of the things that we can get out of Project Leo is models for community energy that we can share across the UK,
right,
with government help, with local authority help, through amazing bodies like Community Energy England. And there's also Community Energy Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And those are not government bodies, they're like the trade body for the community energy sector, and they are amazing. So hopefully we can get it out everywhere if it works.
Right, thank you, Catherine. Another question's come in from Peter Hallworth Baldwin saying, should we be encouraging all our neighbours to have smart meters to improve the quality of data? Does that help you?
That is a very good question, I have to say. So where have we got to so far? The consensus amongst the Leo Consortium partners, I can tell you because we've talked about it, is that it is a good idea to have a SMETS2 meter, which is what you should get now. The previous generation are no more. The reason why I was a little bit hesitant about it is because the way that the provision of meters is set up in the UK is a bit of a dog's dinner, to be frank, post-liberalisation, because the meter is actually owned by a meter operator. It's not the supply, it's not the household, it's somebody else. And what we found in trying to get hold of data is that the meter operators think they own your data too. So there's a whole data problem to unpack. And the other thing just seems mad, but it is true, is that most of those meters are also leased by the meter operator on a 20-year and financed by enormous corporations like Macquarie. So there's a bit of an issue about those meters. And actually what I think that we're going to find as we get all of this new way of working up and running is that increasingly those meters will be sort of bypassed by clever, smart technology on your phone. You know, you just clip a thing to your electricity meter and your phone will get everything it needs. But experts tell me there is a value in a SVETS2 meter, so do go for it.
That sort of ties in with the next question, is how do you persuade ordinary people who are not engineers or technical, but how do you persuade them that, you know, that some anonymous system is going to have control over, for example, when the washing machine comes on? How do you get people to buy into that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And one of the things that we're going to be doing in working all of this through is, and why it's so, frankly, so good that we're in that consortium, is because we've got those people interests in mind all the time. And I've been quite interested to hear the ways that big organizations talk about people. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And so it is all, there's a lot of work to be done on the value propositions to people. You know, why is it good for you to do this? What control do you have? What control are you giving up in order to get what? How does it work if you don't have much asset, if you're fuel poor? All of those sorts of issues we've got to tease apart, and I haven't got an easy answer to that yet.
A question from Hugh Lee. Are there local examples of community energy schemes where residents are sharing or trading their electricity with neighbours?
No, not yet, because the regulations don't easily allow that sort of energy trading. There are some small demonstrations in other places, but I think increasingly it's going to be about flexibility and time of use rather than trading actual electrons, personally. And for any of you who are on Octopus or Bulb, if you're customers of those and you're on their time of use tariffs, you'll know that they've got some very clever measuring and billing apps that already allow you to benefit from shifting your use to away from specific times and into other times. So I think we shouldn't get fixated on buying electrons. We really need to sort out how we can balance the grid. That's much more important, in my humble opinion.
Okay. Another question from Patrick Adams is, do you envisage making green hydrogen from surplus power?
Yeah, I don't think the low carbon hub does. I don't think that's really our bag, because we don't, you know, you do have to understand the technologies that you're getting involved in and building, and it's quite a stretch running across the technologies we do. Green hydrogen is going to be important. It's going to be important for heavy industry. It's going to be important for heavy freight. It might have some application closer to our homes, and opinions differ about that. I think there's consensus that there'll be specific places where green hydrogen will be particularly applicable. I'm just thinking about places like Teesside, where there's a big chemical industry, and it's a valley, and it's just really well made to have a hydrogen line associated with that chemical industry, and it's got lots of offshore wind coming in to shore there. So that sort of combination of circumstances will be really good for making green hydrogen. Then there's a question of how you transport it and how far you want to transport it and how expensive it is to do that. Personally, I'm worried about lots of talk of green hydrogen solving the space heating problem, because the space heating problem is actually a problem. It's a health problem. You can't, so there's a carbon problem, but there's also a health problem. And you don't solve that by just replacing a gas boiler with a hydrogen, whatever it's called, because the fabric of the house is still a problem for the people who live there in terms of it being unhealthy. And the other thing I would say is that in putting in a whole new infrastructure around hydrogen, which is very light, so it escapes very easily from pipes and stuff, it's quite an expensive infrastructure to put in. I'm a little bit concerned that if we go for that, and it's expensive and therefore the energy is expensive, what rich people like us will do, relatively rich people like us will do, will be to retrofit our houses so that we don't need it, leaving all of that burden on the poorer people. So I think there are lots of issues around hydrogen, but it's definitely important, and we've got to work out how to make the best of it.
Another couple of questions come in. This one's about embodied carbon in building products and renewable energy systems. How do we deal with that? And is it about educating people about different solutions and retrofitting existing stock, for example?
I'm going to say something a bit heretical here. I find it really quite hard to get uptight about that sort of embodied carbon, because we can't just stop making or building things. And yeah, there are processes that are really carbon intensive. There are things that we can do about that, but getting uptight about the embodied carbon in renewable energy when the embodied carbon in a nuclear power station is always going to be just tons more than that. And we have to have the energy from somewhere. Embodied, so I think renewables, I really wouldn't worry about too much. Embodied carbon in buildings, for me, it's much more about building the amount of building we need and not the amount of building the market makes us think we need. And so I think there's a real problem about who we sell our houses to in the UK, which means that we think there's a housing shortage that we then have to solve by building more houses. That's completely out with the energy system. But I think it's more of a problem than worrying about the carbon embodied in the thing that you might put into your house personally.
Okay. Question or a point from Peter Thompson about the problems with bureaucracy and legislation and the shambolic rollout of smart meters, which I agree with. How confident can we be that our government will get it right in transforming the infrastructure?
Okay, so a couple of answers to that. I'm being a bit frank. I'm just like, we've got to start saying things as they are. Not only was the smart meter rollout a shambles, but the Green Homes Grant has been a total and utter shambles. So having said that, the next thing I say will be equally challenging, which is to say that increasingly we won't need to, because we'll all be able to do it. And the only thing the government will have to do is get the regulation and the legislation right. And I know that's so that they don't have to do the programs or the funding of things, because increasingly that'll be possible to do, here anyway. Are they going to get the regulation and the legislation right to enable all of this stuff? I think they will, because the pressure will be on them to do so, because there'll be lots of people wanting to do the things that we've been talking about. We already know that people are taking EVs up massively, So I just think this is going to be something that they will have to roll along with, and so they'll have to get it right. Peter, maybe we'll come back in 10 years' time and see if I was right.
Question from John Broad as to, do you agree that it's not only home heating that's going to be required in future, but cooling as well? And does this mean air source heat and cooling is more needed?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. If you design housing right, it wouldn't be so necessary. You know, the way that we agree to, now building standards in this country are just terrible, and the application of them is even worse. I mean, it's just, there's a lot to solve. If we built houses right, the cooling wouldn't be an issue. But given that we don't, it will be. And so having heat pumps that can run both ways is going to be a necessary thing. And so when we're doing our modelling about how much energy we need at certain periods of the year, and we get worried about having too much solar, maybe we won't need to worry as much as we think we do.
Okay.
But of course, then it still impinges on the health of the people who have least and can afford least, because heat is just as much of a health hazard as cold, extreme heat. And so the thing that really does worry me is is how equitable the outcomes of these changes are. And what we're trying to demonstrate as the Low Carbon Hub in Project Leo is that there are ways of designing in equity from the beginning. And I think it's that aspect that I worry about most, because the pressures from big investors and big business to want to do things as usual, i.e. at big scale for remote profit, does militate against the desire to go into the detail to get that equity aspect right.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Barbara. We're just coming up to the hour, so I'm going to hand back to Chris to wrap things up.
Well, thank you, Ian. Thank you, everyone who asked questions, and a huge thank you to Barbara. There's an awful lot to take in there, which is a long way from simply putting a few solar panels on schools, to completely transforming how we use electricity. I think it's absolutely clear that as we shift to more electric heating, electric vehicles and so on, these are all issues we're all really going to have to start understanding. And I think Tony's point about being worried about someone telling you when to switch your washing machine on and off is an important one to answer. But we do know that the trials near Shrivenham, when people were discussing how they could save energy, how many people were enthusiastic to actually get involved. I think there's a lot of appetite for change here. There's a lot of recognition that we need to tackle climate change, and that some of that is about how we blend the technological change with the behavioural and societal change. And I think what we've seen from Barbara, what we've heard from Barbara tonight, is really an interesting example of where we may all be going in the next 5 years. And so it's a challenge. And we are really fortunate to have Project Leo and the Low Carbon Hub doing all this here in Oxford. There are other good community energy projects all over the country, but this kind of work is groundbreaking. And I think it's great that Oxfordshire is doing it. It's going to be an interesting few years. Thank you very much, Barbara, on behalf of the Civic Society.
It's a pleasure, Chris. Thank you very much.
And thanks to everyone for coming. This has been recorded. And Ian, perhaps you could tell us when it'll be on the website?
It usually takes about a week, 10 days to get it onto the YouTube channel. Yeah.
Okay, so watch out for it. You can find the Oxford Civic Society website. The YouTube channel is up there. So if you know anyone who wants to watch it. And final plug, I think the investment fund is still open.
Yeah, you'll have to get in quick though. We've gone like a train. It's been fantastic. We're up for raising 200% of our initial target. So
so there's an awful lot of people voting with their wallets already. So get in there. I better get my check off. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Chris. Good night, everyone.